It all started with one small bolt and a big dream. Soichiro Honda did not come from a rich family, but he had one simple goal: to help people move. His first motorbike was called a toy. His small car was laughed at. But when the world stopped during the fuel crisis, his quiet machines kept going. In the racing world, he didn't come to win. He came so that Ferrari would see Japan as equal. Then, while everyone celebrated Honda's success, Soichiro quietly stepped down, wearing his old work clothes, leaving one message: never forget why we started. But there's one thing most people don't know. Near the end of his life, he still kept a small bolt in his pocket. Why did he keep it? And why didn't he pass the company to his own son? Hamamatsu, early 1910s. A small, quiet village in Japan, surrounded by rice fields, wooden houses, and dirt roads. At the end of a narrow alley, there was a tiny workshop full of hammering sounds and the smell of burning oil. This was where Soichiro Honda first met machines. He was not like other boys. While his friends played with bamboo balls, Soichiro sat under his father's workbench, watching wheels and rusty bolts. He didn't know why, but these things made him feel excited. Every click of a gear, every spinning screw, his eyes lit up. His father, Gihei Honda, was a blacksmith and bicycle repairman. One day, when little Soichiro fixed a broken pedal, Gihei gave him a gift: an old rusty bolt. "Keep this safe," Gihei said. "If you can make one bolt work, you can make a whole machine run." Soichiro kept that bolt in his pocket all the time. He called it his dream bolt, but not everyone believed in him. At school, Soichiro struggled. He didn't like reading books or memorizing facts. His teacher once pointed at him in front of the whole class and said, If you keep acting like this, you'll never be anyone, Honda." The other kids laughed. They called him Grease Boy and the smell of the workshop. Soichiro didn't reply. He stayed quiet, but in his heart, something stronger was growing. He wanted to prove them wrong, not with words, but with what he could build. One rainy afternoon, Soichiro heard a loud noise, something new and powerful. Children ran to the road. A black Ford Model T car passed slowly through the village. It was big, shiny, and made a deep engine sound. For a small village like Hamamatsu, it was like seeing a machine from another world. Soichiro stood still, his eyes wide. Then suddenly, he ran, barefoot, through the mud. He chased the car until it disappeared around the corner. He was out of breath, soaking wet but smiling. "If they can build that, so can I," he whispered. That was the moment the dream was born. That night, he searched through the workshop for wood, wires, and old metal. He didn't know how cars worked, but he knew one thing: he had to start somewhere. After a few days, he finished his mini car model and brought it to school. He hoped his friends would be impressed, but instead they laughed. "What is this? A toy for mice. You call this a car?" "Ha!" One boy even kicked it and broke it into pieces. Soichiro picked up the broken parts and walked away silently. That evening, he sat alone behind the workshop. Rain was falling lightly. His mother, Mika Honda, brought him a blanket and said softly, "Dreams are nice, son, but don't forget, life is real. You need to grow up." Soichiro didn't answer. He reached into his pocket and held his dream bolt tightly. Then he stood up, took his tools, and began fixing the broken model. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because he knew it wasn't done yet. A few days later, his father, Gihei, gently placed a hand on his head. "Your name, Soichiro, means first son with principles. I named you that because I believed you'd be someone who lives with strong values. We may come from a simple place, but that doesn't mean we belong only in the dirt." Soichiro gave a small smile. He didn't say much, but he understood. In a world that only cared about grades, Soichiro Honda was just a boy with dirty hands and a noisy mind. But under the dim light of that small workshop, surrounded by bolts and oil, he was building something no one could see yet. He didn't know that one day, his name would be on millions of machines across the world. But that night, in his small, oily hands, he held something even more powerful than a plan: curiosity. and the courage to keep dreaming, even when the world laughed. The small bolt was still in his pocket. Years had passed since Soichiro Honda received it from his father, his first reward after fixing a bicycle pedal. But now, his hands were no longer small. They were rough, stained, and filled with the work of a man chasing something much bigger, a future in Japan's growing car industry. Soichiro knew he couldn't build a whole car right away. That would take money, factories, and hundreds of workers. But he believed in starting small, so he focused on one important part, the piston ring. If I can make just one perfect part, I can be part of something much bigger, he whispered one night, staring at the rough metal shape in his hand. In his small workshop, Tokai Seiki, Soichiro worked day and night. He bent the metal, checked the size, and wrote everything down. His tools were simple. His micrometer wasn't very accurate, but he didn't stop. If the piston was off, even by 0.02 millimeters, he would start over again. Even a small mistake can break the engine, he told his wife, Sachi, when she brought him warm tea late at night. His eyes looked tired, but they still burned with determination. After months of hard work, Soichiro believed he was ready. He cleaned his only suit, packed his piston rings into a small case, and took a train to Tokyo. His dream? To sell them to Toyota. He waited nervously outside their office. When it was finally his turn, he walked into the room. A manager looked at the piston rings for a few seconds. Cold fingers, blank eyes, no smile. Mr. Honda, I'm sorry. These are not good enough. The quality is too low. We cannot accept them. Soichiro stood still. But we only accept high standards. These don't meet them. The words felt like a punch to his chest. The sky over Tokyo was dark as Soichiro walked back into the street. Rain started to fall. The sounds of the city faded into the background. In his hand, he held the case tightly, not because it was heavy, but because it carried his broken pride. Every step felt heavier than the last. Every raindrop whispered, "You failed. Give up." Back at home, Sachi waited at the dinner table. He sat down, quiet, wet, tired. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "I need to learn more. About metal, about machines, about why they said no." "Where will you study?" she asked. "A technical school, in Hamamatsu." "And the money?" He looked at her, serious. "Your wedding ring, and the necklace from your mother." She opened a drawer, took out the two most precious things she owned, and placed them gently on the table. No tears, no argument, just one sentence. "If you believe in it, then go." Soichiro joined a technical school. He sat in the back of the classroom, surrounded by younger students. He listened. He tried, but his heart was somewhere else, in his workshop, with his tools, with the machines that never stopped talking to him. A few weeks later, he packed his bag, stood up, and walked out. He never returned. I'll learn more from one failed bolt, then from 10 lectures. Back at Tokai Seiki, he started again. But this time he was sharper, smarter, more precise. He tried different types of metal. He tested new heating and cooling techniques. This time, the piston ring was not only strong, it was perfect. When he returned to Toyota, they finally accepted his work. But success didn't come easy. One day, a business partner canceled a big order. No warning. The factory stood still. Workers waited. There was no money for salaries. Soichiro stood in front of them and said, "If this all collapses, I'll start again, from the first bolt." One evening, an assistant in the workshop asked, "Why do you only make piston rings, Mr. Honda? Why not something bigger?" Soichiro wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled. "Because this part is small, but without it, the engine won't run." That's a good place to start. He wasn't just making machine parts. He was building something far more important. His character, his strength, and his future. When the world said he wasn't precise enough, Soichiro refused to give up. Because what he was shaping wasn't just piston rings, it was himself. Soichiro Honda's dream was finally moving forward. After years of failure and hard work, Toyota had accepted his piston rings. His company, Tokai Seiki, was growing fast. He had nearly 2,000 workers, and his factory supplied parts to many car companies in Japan. Each morning, the sound of machines filled the air. He smiled, knowing this was just the beginning. But the world had other plans. The war was coming, and it didn't wait for anyone. In 1944, the sky over Hamamatsu turned red. Sirens screamed. Soichiro ran outside and looked up. Planes flew overhead, bombers from the Allied forces. A loud explosion shook the earth. His factory, his life's work, was on fire. The building collapsed. Machines were gone. From a distance, Soichiro stood silently, holding the only piston mold he could save. His hands were shaking, his eyes blank. How could something I built for 10 years be destroyed in one afternoon? A few months later, a strong earthquake hit the city. The broken factory fell completely. Machines bent, walls cracked. Nothing was left. Soichiro sat alone in the ruins. Dust filled the air. He reached into his pocket and held the old bolt he had since childhood. But now, he no longer knew why he kept it. At home, the cooking fire had stopped for days. Food was low. Soichiro sat in silence, staring at the last piston mold. Then slowly, he threw it into the fire to boil water. What's the use of holding on to dreams if the stove is cold? For the first time in his life, Soichiro almost gave up. One morning, he sat in front of his house, still quiet. An old neighbor pushed his bicycle up a hill, out of breath. If only this bike could ride itself, the man said with a tired laugh. Soichiro turned his head slowly. In the corner of the house, he saw a small engine, a leftover from a war. He whispered to himself, why not? And just like that, the dream began to move again. Using simple tools and a tired heart, Soichiro started building something he never tried before, a motorized bicycle. He attached the engine to a bicycle. He added a fuel pipe made from an old tin can. He adjusted the wheels and gears. The first test failed. The engine shook, made black smoke, and stopped. The bike nearly tipped over. Children nearby laughed. Is that a bike? Or a broken rocket? Soichiro didn't answer. He bent down, picked up a small bolt that had fallen, blew the dust off, and put it back in his pocket. It can still be fixed, he whispered. Days later, the second test worked. The bike was slow, noisy, and smelled of smoke, but it moved. People gathered to watch. One neighbor ordered one, then another, then 10. Soichiro had no time to rest. Out of old machines and broken bicycles, he had created something that truly helped people. This was the beginning of Honda Motor Company. That night, long after the city had fallen asleep, Soichiro sat in his workshop. He looked at the small bolt on the table. You're still here, huh? He said with a soft smile. He placed the bolt on the frame of a new bike. Not because it was needed, but as a reminder, everything started from one small thing. When the world was burning, Soichiro Honda didn't wait for it to stop. He stepped into the ashes, picked up what was left, and built something that could move again. In the beginning, Soichiro Honda dreamed of speed. He wanted to build race cars, fast, loud, powerful, cars that roared on world tracks like lions. He wanted to be the Ferrari of Japan. But the world around him was changing. People didn't need fast machines. They needed something simple, a way to move forward. Mothers needed to go to the market. Bakers needed to deliver bread. Students needed to ride up hills to school. Farmers needed to go to the city without walking for hours. And Soichiro asked himself one big question. Can I build a machine that anyone can ride? One night, he stood in the design room. On one side, his old dream, fast car sketches. On the other, a small, quiet motorbike design with no clutch. He stared at both. Then slowly, he picked up his marker and started drawing again. Honda Super Cub, he said softly to his team. The room went quiet. No clutch. Only 50 cubic centimeters engine. It looks like a toy. Soichiro didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a small bolt from his pocket, the same one he had since childhood. He held it tightly and said, if the world isn't ready for this, then it's the world that must change. With his business partner Takeo Fujisawa, Soichiro began building his idea. Honda focused on the machine, strength, fuel efficiency, and stability. Fujisawa handled the business, marketing, distribution, and customer needs. They didn't always agree. "You care too much about bolts, Honda," Fujisawa once said. "And you care too much about smiles," Honda replied. "But that smile disappears when the engine fails." But from this balance, something powerful was born. The first test of the Super Cub failed. The engine overheated. The frame cracked. Oil leaked. Soichiro didn't yell. He stepped off the bike, stood quietly, and said, "Try again." He tested it over and over, threw it downstairs, rode it over rocky hills, and even carried a bag of eggs on the seat. If this motorbike can carry eggs without breaking them, then anyone can ride it. At last, the Super Cub was ready. It was small, quiet, easy to use, fuel efficient, no gear clutch, no loud sound, no intimidation. Perfect for everyday people. But the world wasn't ready yet. Sales were slow. Some dealers returned bikes. Many thought the Super Cub was too soft, too small, or not manly. Fujisawa started to worry. Honda stayed quiet. Until one day, Fujisawa took a bold step. He launched a simple ad campaign in America. Photos showed kind people riding the Super Cub: a mother, a student, a teacher, a young couple. The slogan was simple: "You meet the nicest people on a Honda." And everything changed. Super Cub became the most loved motorbike in Japan, in America, and across Asia. Because it was simple, because it was cheap, because it gave people freedom. A housewife in Tokyo smiled and said, "Now I can go places by myself. I don't need to wait for my husband." A student in Jakarta said, "This was my first motorcycle, and the one I trust the most." Super Cub became more than a machine. It became a symbol of freedom, confidence, and independence. Soichiro stood by the window of his factory. Years ago, that factory gave smoke, steel, and loud noise. Now it gave something softer but stronger: trust. He walked toward one Super Cub, touched the seat, and smiled. "I didn't build a dream to go fast. I built something that helped people move." With the Super Cub, Soichiro Honda didn't just create a motorcycle. He created a new way for the world to move, powered not by speed, but by belief. The sky over Los Angeles was bright, but inside a small office newly opened by Honda, things felt heavy. A large map of the U.S. hung on the wall, marked with red dots, possible dealers. But so far, none had said yes. Soichiro Honda stood in front of the map, silent. Takeo Fujisawa placed a sales report on the desk behind him. 3 months, and not one motorbike has left the warehouse. Soichiro didn't turn around. He simply looked out the window and replied, "If they won't open the door, then we build our own door." Back in Japan, the Super Cub was a huge success. But in America, it was seen as a toy, too small, too quiet, too friendly. Americans were used to loud motorcycles, leather jackets, and open highways. Honda came with the opposite. In the warehouse, rows of untouched Super Cubs stood silently. Some staff were starting to worry. Did we bring the wrong dream to this country? Soichiro didn't answer. But that night, he sat alone at his desk, staring at a Super Cub sketch, asking himself quietly, am I still building machines for people? Or just for numbers? Across the ocean, another storm was growing. Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki, all were born from the same land. And now they were catching up, faster, cheaper, louder. Their bikes were sleek, modern, and stylish. Their sales were growing quickly. Pressure began rising inside Honda. We need to follow the trend, said some of the business team. Yamaha is launching sports bikes. We're falling behind. Even Fujisawa, usually calm, pushed for expansion. If we stay slow, they'll beat us. Soichiro said nothing at first. He took a small bolt from his pocket, one he had kept since he was young. He rolled it gently between his fingers and then said softly, if we rush, we lose who we are. Instead of chasing the race, Soichiro chose a different path, racing for pride, not just sales. Honda would enter the Grand Prix World Championship. Before the team left, Soichiro stood before them. not with medals or promises, but with a quiet challenge. "The world once knew Japan for war," he said. "Let them now know us for the courage to build." In 1964, on the racetracks of Europe, a small Japanese engine beat the giants of Europe. The Japanese flag rose, not from battle, but from brilliance. Soichiro watched from the sidelines, his eyes misty. "We didn't shout louder, but now the world is starting to listen." Back in America, Fujisawa was busy with a different kind of race, winning hearts. Instead of tattoos and noise, Honda's ads showed kind people, mothers, students, families, riding small, friendly motorcycles. And with one simple sentence, everything changed. "You meet the nicest people on Honda." People smiled, dealers called, and slowly, the warehouse became empty. But still, critics whispered, "Honda? Cheap bikes. Not powerful. Not prestigious." Soichiro didn't argue. But in one meeting, he looked up and asked calmly, "They say we're cheap. But how long do their bikes last in real hands?" No one had an answer. "We don't build for the stage. We build for the long road." At the factory, a giant gear kept turning. A young worker wiped sweat from his forehead and joked, "This thing never stops." Soichiro passed by, paused, and said, "Because it knows. Stopping means the end." 1969. Honda became the largest motorcycle company in the world. From a small alley in Hamamatsu to the streets of Paris, Jakarta, and New York. But while others were celebrating, Soichiro quietly walked into the back of his office. He opened an old cabinet. Inside was a faded drawing, a car sketch. He touched the paper gently and smiled. "We started with a small bolt, then a bicycle, then a motorbike, and now the wheels must keep turning." He looked out the window. The streets outside were busy, but in Soichiro's eyes, a new road had just appeared. While others raced for speed and sound, Soichiro Honda didn't shout. He tightened a small bolt and let the world see that even something small can carry the biggest dreams. Time kept moving, but for Soichiro Honda, a wheel should do more than spin. It must go somewhere. And after taking his little motorcycles around the world, Soichiro looked ahead. Not to speed, not to fame, but to something deeper, something that could last longer than him. In 1972, Soichiro stood in a simple room with his team. In the middle stood a small car, the Honda Civic. It was not powerful, not luxurious, but it was calm, light, efficient. One young engineer asked, "Who is this car for, sir?" Soichiro smiled softly and replied, "This car is not for showing off. It's for people who just want to keep moving, without losing tomorrow." At that time, the world didn't care. Big cars ruled the roads, big engines, big fuel tanks, big everything. But 1 year later, in 1973, an oil crisis hit the world. Gasoline became expensive. Big cars stood still, and a little Civic kept going. People began to understand. Small didn't mean weak. Quiet didn't mean slow. Simple didn't mean less. But Soichiro wasn't finished. He turned his eyes towards something that once seemed impossible, Formula One. Not to become a legend, but to show the world that Japan was no longer watching from the sidelines. Honda returned to F1, circuit after circuit, engine after engine, and Soichiro, though older now, stood in the pit, studying the track, talking to engineers, taking notes. One reporter asked, "Do you want to beat Ferrari?" He answered, while looking at the racing line, "I just want Ferrari to greet us as equals." Wins came. Honda engines took big teams, like McLaren and Williams, to the top of the podium. But Soichiro didn't cheer loudly. He didn't want noise. He wanted respect, earned through work, not words. As Honda Motor Company grew larger in the 1980s, something else changed too. Meeting rooms got bigger. More investors, more suits, more charts, less tools. Soichiro started to feel like a guest in the house he had built. One morning, he came to the office wearing his old work clothes. He entered the boardroom, full of people in ties and jackets. He placed a paper on the table, his resignation letter. He didn't say much. "I built this company with oil and mistakes. Now you continue with heart, and care. But please, never forget why we started. He stepped down, not because he was tired, but because he knew a wheel doesn't always need the same hand to spin it, but it must always spin in the right direction. Soichiro had two sons. One of them, Hirotoshi Honda, created Mugen Motorsports, a racing and tuning company with Honda's DNA. But he never inherited Honda Motor Company, not because he wasn't capable, but because Soichiro believed a name can be passed down, but values must be earned. August 5th, 1991, Soichiro Honda passed away in Tokyo from liver failure. He was 84 years old. There was no grand ceremony, no long parade. But that morning, all around the world, millions of people started their small Honda engines and went to work. They didn't know it, but they were continuing what he began. Weeks later, a young worker walked into an old corner of the factory. There, inside a dusty drawer, he found a small bolt in a wooden box. No label, just a note, written in faded ink. If you believe in one bolt, you can move the world. Today, many years later, Civics are still on the road. Super Cubs still hum quietly on morning streets. And young people in workshops, garages, classrooms are still chasing dreams built from small, honest things. They may not know the name Soichiro Honda, but every time they choose something simple, something that lasts, something that works without making noise, they're speaking in his language. Soichiro Honda did not leave behind a crown. He left a direction. He left no giant footprints, just tiny wheels that keep turning and moving the world forward.